Ooh, wasabi guys, coming back at you with another Commander 2017 video. This time, I want to go over the best value for Commander 2017 decks. Which deck is going to be worth your money, and why I believe so. I'm going to go over each individual deck here, all four of them, and I'm going to go through the pros and the cons. I'm going to be going over what I like about these, what I feel that you should know about these decks before you make the decision to buy them. If you're experienced in Commander and you have a lot of experience in Magic in general, and you feel like you have good evaluation skills when it comes to picking products that you like to buy, this may not be the video for you. This is mainly for newcomers to the Commander format, people who may not have the best understanding of what commanders have the most potential and which decks give you the best value. I'm going to be going over each deck here. First here we have Feline Ferocity, the cat tribal deck. This is led by Arabo, Roar of the World. When it comes to the Eminence ability, it is rather dull. It is more or less just cat combat, and that's pretty much what the deck seems to be, with Arabo leading it. Now the other options here are Nazan, Revered Bladesmith, which is pretty cool. He has an interaction with his own equipment in the deck, so I think that's quite interesting, and doesn't make a terrible Voltron option. You also have Miri, Weatherlight Duelist, which is more or less just a Celestia combat specialist type of commander option. Nothing too crazy there. And then we also have Balan, who's more or less just the optimal mono white Voltron option here. So you have a synergy with combat, you have synergies with equipment, and that's not unusual to see in the cat tribe. We've seen this on Mirrodin before. And aside from these legendaries, we have some notable reprints as well. We have Mirari's Wake, Leon and Shikari, Leon and Arbiter, as well as Qasali Pride Mage, which is a very good common, one of the best commons that they could have reprinted in this set, all of which pump up the value of this deck considerably and make it worth buying, in my opinion. You have the best reprint out of all four of these decks in Mirari's Wake. It's just a staple in Celestia colors, period. You can't really go wrong with this card, and you have two pretty good Leonins here. You have the Shikari and the Arbiter, very good for cat tribal, and you have Qasali Pride Mage, which is just a good card for artifact and enchantment removal, which is so important in this format, all of which is probably playing to the biggest strength of this deck, and that is the reprints that help form the basis for what this deck is supposed to do, and that is very good, and I like these a lot. So going over the pros to this deck, we obviously have great reprints like the ones I just mentioned, and you also have the fact that we have great Voltron options. You have both Nazan and you have Balan here, which are very good for equipment strategies, and they're most likely going to draw the most attention when it comes to newer Voltron strategies. When it comes to cons, well, unfortunately, out of the four decks, this probably has the lowest ceiling out of all of them. There's just not too much you can do other than Voltron. You have cat, tribal, and combat, and that's pretty much all you can really do with Arabo. It's nothing too special, not garbage, but not spectacular, nothing too interesting. Just doesn't really spark too much interest. And that's the other weakness, is the fact that Arabo is easily the weakest Eminence-based commander. So right off the bat there, your front card is pretty weak compared to the other three. Not going to be too interesting to build around, and could be a huge factor in why you may not choose this deck to buy, why you may not choose this deck to play or build around. Moving on to the next deck here, we have Draconic Domination, the dragon deck here, led by the Dragon. Now this dude is big, he's massive, he's difficult to cast, he's 9 mana there, so you have a dominating force here once you get him out though. Makes it easier to get out your other dragons. His Eminence ability is one of the better ones. Making all your dragons cost 1 less is very good, and it's going to be a huge reason why a lot of people are going to come out and buy this deck personally, just for the legendaries here. They're pretty cool. You also have Ogakachi, Vengeful Kami, who's kind of interesting, not really something I would put as a commander, more like one of the 99, is more utility, and Ramos Dragon Engine for utility again and mana ramp. So you have your options there, and it's really cool. I definitely like what they did with the legendaries here. They kind of split it up here, but definitely the Dragon is meant to be the commander out of the bunch here, and it really works well. And some notable reprints, we have Udvara Hellkite, which is, pretty much one of the only notable reprints, along with Scion of the Dragon. I mean, these two are around $5 each. So that's really where the money's going to be in the reprints are between these two guys. And you also have Crux of Fate, which is another notable reprint, mostly because we only had it in Fate Reforged, and having it again is pretty cool that we get to have a Wrath spell that specifically can get around our dragons, and we can still keep our dragons on the field. Everything else gets destroyed. It's pretty cool. So going into the pros of this deck, I think this deck is great for new players. I think that many people are going to associate this deck with just good times and huge, massive dragons and big plays and just interesting outcomes altogether. And a lot of players in the format are Timmys. Timmys are basically players that they love big plays, they love interesting, exciting plays, things that make you go ooh and ah, just absolutely just crazy shit happening, and I think that dragons are definitely capable of doing that. And the Legendaries are just powerful. They're great looking, and they definitely look like they're going to be competitive in this format. Going on to cons, this deck, unfortunately, being 5 colors, it does need some expensive upgrades. We're talking about lands, mainly lands, because unfortunately the deck comes loaded with a bunch of those enter the battlefield tapped lands that tap for 3 mana, and while those aren't terrible, they're not optimal by any means necessary. We're talking about upgrading to fetch lands, shock lands at the very least, and potentially dual lands, which are going to be more expensive. But we're talking about making your deck optimal. You don't have to make it as optimal putting in dual lands. You could obviously just go with the shock lands or pain lands or even cheaper options. So to make it as optimal as you can, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And another downside is that this deck is just slower than I think a lot of people are going to expect it to be. Even though the Eminence ability is going to come into play, it's going to make your dragons cheaper. The deck is still going to be slow, whether you realize it or not. I mean, that's at best going to be a dragon or two a turn, and you're also going to have to consider a lot of your deck's going to be mana ramp, so you're going to have a lot of times where you have enough mana to do stuff, but you just don't have the engine or the card draw necessary to keep your deck going, and I feel like that's a big weakness with this deck going into Commander 2017, going into this season of Commander, where there's going to be a ton of dragons, there's going to be a ton of decks here that try to abuse this. Unfortunately, I just don't feel like there's enough speed, there's not enough of a card draw engine with this deck to really push it to that next level. As far as a competitive standpoint, I wouldn't recommend it, but from a value standpoint, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that these legendaries are going to be pretty valuable. Moving on to the Arcane Wizardry deck, the Wizard Tribal deck here, obviously, we have the Inala Archmage Ritualist, as well as Marcel the Pretender, and Kess Dissident Mage. Inala being the most powerful option of the 3, in my opinion. The Eminence ability is easily the best. Being able to copy a wizard when it enters the battlefield just for paying 1 mana is ridiculous, and tapping 5 wizards to have an opponent lose 7 life is a very good win con. Marcel the Pretender is probably the most interesting looking commander option that we have in the whole set together, just for the sheer fact that we don't really have anything like it that can exile cards and copy activated abilities and basically use them over and over again. It's very interesting, and it definitely is going to draw a lot of attention for deck builders and people that like to go and think outside the box and be creative. And Kess Dissident Mage, some people are going to draw comparisons to Storm and say that she is a very good option for Storm as a commander. I personally feel that she's better as one of the 99 in Storm decks, but not a terrible option. Notable reprints are Havengul Lich, Nin the Pain Artist, and Marchesa the Black Rose. All of these desperately needed some reprints here. They're great options. Nin the Pain Artist and Marchesa are decent as commanders, and Havengul Lich is just a good utility card for graveyard-based decks and is pretty good as a wizard too. But all these add on to just a stacked deck and just the potential for this deck because of all these awesome legendaries that you have in here. It's definitely going to propel this deck to the next level. So we move on to the pros here. The deck has a very high ceiling to build around. You have great options, whether it's Inala or Marcel. The options that you have there, it's incredible. There's so much that you can add to this deck, and wizards are some of the most powerful creatures in all of Magic, and they're never going to stop making them, and they're never going to stop making them good. And also another thing about them too is that they're versatile. They don't just do one thing. They're not just well known for doing this or doing that. They're not just combat specialists. They do different things, and you're not going to typically see one thing out of a wizard. They're very unique. Some tap and some untap. Some control. Some do this. Some enter the battlefield and bounce a spell back to the hand. I mean, they're pretty cool. You also have unique commander options. They're all very different. They don't really overlap with other wizards here. You sort of have, different aspects among these. And the reprints are just very good. I wouldn't say they're as expensive or valuable as the ones in the cat deck, but they're still pretty decent. And cons are not unlike the dragon deck. You're going to have a lot of costs when it comes to improving the deck, mainly when we talk about cards like Vendilion Click, Snapcaster Mage, obvious auto-includes in a deck like Anala's. So you want to take advantage of a lot of good wizards and being able to copy their ETBs, and those tend to be the best between those two. And you also have some other expensive options as well. Going into a 3-color deck, the land base is still pretty expensive, but it shouldn't be as bad as the dragon deck. But there are a lot of expensive wizards though. Another con is that a deck like this is a little bit harder to play for new players. If you are newer to the Commander format, this may not be the deck for you. There is a lot of interaction when it comes to Marcel, a lot of misplays that can happen if you don't know what you're doing. So that's not necessarily going to be friendly for new players. But if you feel like you can handle it, go for it, buddy. I don't really care. Just keep in mind, blue is not typically friendly for new players. And then moving on to the last deck here, Vampiric Bloodlust, led by Edgar Markov, as well as Lycia Sanguine Tribune and Mothis Fiend Seeker, all of which are pretty decent options. But unfortunately, to be honest, Edgar Markov steals the show here out of these 3 legendaries. There's really no contest. The Eminence ability is fair, it's decent, and once you get him out there on the field, he's just a pain in the ass to deal with. He has first strike, he automatically becomes a 5/5 when you attack with him. He puts a +1/+1 counter on himself, as well as other vampires you control. So the Eminence is fair, and as far as being a combat specialist, he's pretty good. So you have just an easy commander to work with here, whereas Lycia is kind of linear and boring. I mean, no offense, if you want to make a life gain deck built around her, go for it. She doesn't really have that sort of, make other spells cost less, not unlike Neheb or Rakdos Lord of Riots, where you can make other spells cost less. And this is just a life gain deck that's going to be built around making her bigger, and she's more or less just going to be a Voltron deck. And unfortunately, in these colors, we have better options, as well as even in Orzhov colors, we have better options that work with life gain, such as Karlov. So not really all that interesting. And Mothis is more or less going to be a group hug, political type of deck that's not going to be super competitive, but it could be fun. Not saying these options are terrible, but compared to Edgar Markov, they're just not as optimal or as easy to work with or build around. Some notable reprints here are Captivating Vampire, Blade of the Blood Chief, Door of Destinies, and Well of Lost Dreams, all of which are at least a few dollars, if not more than that. So they're all pretty decent reprints. Captivating Vampire was a no-brainer. You get to tap vampires and you get to gain control of creatures. That's pretty cool there. Blade of the Blood Chief synergizes perfectly with this deck. You get +1/+1 counters on your vampires, a lot easier than you normally would. Door of Destinies, again, synergizes with, vampires. It synergizes with any of these decks, really. You could swap it into any other commander deck, and it's a pretty good card. It's very good for tribal. Makes your other vampires, makes your vampire tokens a lot bigger. And Well of Lost Dreams works well with the life gain strategy if you want to go that route with Alicia. So pros for this deck would be that the fact that it's friendly for newer players, it's going to be a lot easier for everyone to work with. It's not difficult to understand. The goal of the Edgar Markov deck, the strategy there would be to get him out, swing, get +1/+1 counters on your vampires, and that's about it. You're going to be super aggressive with him. Marduk's already super aggressive, so having a haste and first strike commander, that's pretty awesome. The reprints are pretty good. I would say they're up there. Maybe not as good as the cat deck, but they're definitely worth considering buying this deck for. And the flavor's obviously going to be the best there. You have a ton of good synergies with +1/+1 counters, and vampires are just awesome. The lore is probably the most anticipated out of the four here, just because Edgar Markov is easily the most well-known out of the bunch here. We all love Soren, so why not love his grandfather as well? Some cons would be the fact that this deck doesn't necessarily have a high ceiling either. It's mainly going to be an aggressive vampire deck. This deck doesn't really seem like it's going to be anything more than just an aggressive Mardu deck. I think the flavor is really the only thing that's going to make it stand out there. It is cool vampires, so that's what it has going for it. But it's really nothing too special. It's just a super aggressive Mardu build here. Keep that in mind. It's not going to blow your mind with all these complex interactions. It's just vampires that get +1/+1 counters. And also keep in mind here that aside from Edgar Markov, the other two commander options that we have here in Lycia and Mathis, they're not really easier to build around. They're not really easy to win with as much as I feel that Edgar Markov is going to be. They're not going to be as powerful when you go to build around them. I don't feel that they're going to be easy to build around either. Save yourself the trouble and just focus around Edgar, because he's going to be the most powerful of the three here, and he's going to have the easiest to build around quality compared to these other two, and that is the fact that he's super aggressive, and his Eminence is just, that's where a lot of the value is there. When he attacks, you get +1/+1 counters. I mean, it's easy to understand, it's easy to work with. The other two I just don't really see having as much of an impact. Overall, if I had to say which deck is my favorite here, I would go with the Wizard deck. Personally, I feel like it has the highest ceiling, it has the most potential out of the four here. However, if I had to go with the most friendly out of the box deck, it would probably be the Dragon deck. It has a lot of power there. I mean, there's a ton of dragons. They're very awesome. They're very cool. Can't go wrong with any of these four. If you love the reprints, go with the cat deck. If you love how easy it is to play with the deck, go with a vampire deck. Can't go wrong with any of these four, but that's just my 2 cents. At the end of the day, it comes down to you guys making wise decisions with your money. If you feel like buying all four of these, go for it. You know, have yourself a good time there. Get 3 other friends and have a 4-player game with these. So anyway, guys, signing off here, Void Mage Gamer. Have a wonderful day.